One of the things that kind of stopped me in my tracks today is this revelation. It's been released by The Telegraph, actually. And what they're suggesting is that there is this charity, LGBT Youth Scotland, it's called. And what they're apparently doing is schools, primary schools in some cases, apparently, have been signing up to their LGBT Charter. Now, I'll tell you just some of the things. It costs between £850 and £2,000 to sign up for this. What you do, there's all these different stages that you can reach. If you want to get to gold status, you've got to do things like appoint at least 2 pupils and 2 staff members as LGBT champions. Remember that these pupils, of course, are as young as 4. They're talking about you need to have unisex toilets, basically, like gender-neutral toilets. Yeah, they urge these people on these schemes, these schools on these schemes, to celebrate National Coming Out Day, Transgender Day of Visibility. And I find this really quite concerning. What they're suggesting as well is that schools' policies should be rewritten in areas such as transgender inclusion and so on and so forth. They celebrate that, they say that they are changing the culture and the ethos of Scottish schools. I get very concerned about this as a mum to a young boy that imminently will be starting primary school. I don't believe, Kelvin, that adult sexual issues have got any place being taught to 5-year-old children. What do you think?
Well, you know, clearly I don't either, and why the children can't be allowed just to do painting and generally learn about the first steps in life without having some of the more serious issues thrust at them which are going to come at them, you know, probably within the next by the time they're into their teens. It's beyond me. The other thing is, of course, with these charities, of course, publicity is good for them. Publicity does 2 things. It gives them some kind of credence when no matter how crackpot they might be, and it also almost certainly brings them money. And within Scotland right now, it's so much a kind of foreign country now, which is what they want to do, that they quite enjoy introducing these kinds of ideas which they know are likely to aggravate the paymaster, which is the English taxpayer.
Well, no, actually, because this particular one in Scotland, they've received almost £500,000 in taxpayer funding from the SNP government, a further £340,000 from local authorities, and NHS organisations have apparently handed over another £154,000. Judita, what do you make to all this?
I think what's kind of happening is, in a weird way, I can understand and I see the righteousness and validity of the motivation behind it, but the execution is flawed, because what you have is adults who have lived an experience where they dealt with so much, where they felt they were othered, whether it was in school or in university or at work, and they're thinking, how could my life have been better? And thinking by putting things in place to make other potentially LGBTQIA plus children have a better life, they've done something good, they've left a better legacy. That's a righteous thing, but the execution is poor, because like you've said, and I agree, children shouldn't be politicized and shouldn't be sexualized. A 4-year-old should not be thinking about who they fancy. Just paint with potatoes and leave it at that. But then you have to think that there are ways to institute an educational environment where a child going to school knows that sometimes Lucy might have a dad and a dad, or a mum and a mum. Or if one day I look at a boy and I'm a boy and I really want to ask them to the school dance, that's okay. I shouldn't feel weird. So that's why I say I understand the motivation.
Well, that took about 2 seconds to explain that. Families are different. Some people have 2 mums, 2 dads. Some people don't have a mum. Some people don't have a dad. I don't know. Some people are brought up by their grandparents because their parents have passed away. Whatever. Families come in different shapes and sizes. That took me and you about 2 minutes to explain. We don't need to be spending thousands of pounds to sign up to these very odd. To me personally, I think there's something sinister in this, that this organisation, or organisations plural, because there's loads of people doing this, that organisations are charging schools to be part of this odd league table about who's trying to outdo who when it comes to who is more trans inclusive with the kids than the next person. There's something makes me uneasy about this.
Supposing a child comes home and says, you think, oh, I've done well today. He said, well, how have you done? He said, well, I was #1 painter, or I was #1 reader. No, I wasn't. I was made LGBT champion. This is a 4- and 5-year-old. Look, I can understand this, actually, as we develop into the secondary school. I can understand more debates taking place. I cannot understand why we have to thrust it at young children. And I think if you ask the parents, they'd be hostile to it. And what about the role the teacher has to play in all this? And then at the same time, they're supposed to spend money changing all the lavatories.
Yes.
And all this. Isn't it bizarre?
What you have now is that society has been one way, the pendulum is swinging the other way, and they're pushing it very far in order to kind of proliferate change. And this is probably the toughest period in that evolutionary process, because the LGBTQ plus community is saying that you've got to really rage against the machine to get people to listen. Because put it like this now, even this conversation, the whole country is listening, the whole world is listening. These are the kinds of eyeballs and ears they haven't had before. And there's going to be friction. There's going to be a locking of heads in the process to getting to a point where you establish a new equilibrium where they feel more incorporated into society.
Can I just ask a question? Perhaps you know the answer to this. Are there members of the gay community? Are all the members of the gay community, are they in favour of this, or is this some crackpot charity that can do well in Scotland but can't do it anywhere? I suspect anywhere else. Where is the demand from the gay community for this kind of indoctrination or this discussion to take place?
That is where I feel like that's a very good point, because one thing I was going to say is that what people always have to bear in mind is, in a lot of minority groups, the people who shout loudest are the most extreme. The people who tend to agree with pragmatic thinking and gently does it just want to get on with their lives. I know a lot of, in my day-to-day life and the work I've done over the years, trans people, gay people, lesbians who've said that, I'm not going to get on social media and howl at the moon. I don't agree with this, but I've been through so much trying to get to a point where I'm happy in my life. I'm not going to invite more stress into it. I just want to get on with it. So that's why I said that it's going to take time, where the militant voices will eventually be hushed, because, like I've said, the greatest force of allies that the LGBTQ plus community has always had is heterosexual women. What you're moving towards now is doing things that is beginning to turn them from allies into people who feel that, oh, for you to thrive, I'm being deprived, and that's a problem. When they realize you're alienating allies, they will understand you've got to recalibrate to have that kind of understanding between both parties.
You say that everybody's listening. My child won't be listening, because if my child was in a school and then they was deciding aged 4, 5, we're going to have this trans, identification day or whatever they call it. I wouldn't want my child in that lesson, because for me, I think that you're trying to deliberately plant seeds of confusion into the minds of very young, already confused children. My kid half the time thinks he's a T-Rex. I mean, this is the level of age groups that we're talking about. And I think that when you start trying to deliberately confuse these children, there's something not quite right about that.
I don't think they're deliberately trying to confuse them. Again, I think it's what's happening is their own trauma is fueling the motivation for them to try to help, but they're helping in the wrong way. Because you're bringing, like they said, the politics exists within adults, and you're trying to resolve it through children.
But what about the public money involved? So the NHS, I'm told, are skint. They're jumping in. I'm told the local councils are skint. They're contributing. The government, which, by the way, we know the use of government skint because basically we have to fund it. So, or the British taxpayer, mainly the English, have to fund it. So this costs genuine amounts of money. Who decided? Yeah, I tell you what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about these sensitive issues to 4-year-olds, and we're going to make them champions of the gay community or something. It is. Honestly, it is quite wrong. There's a lot that you can do with money like that to educate your children better. I don't think this is a good idea.
But that's why I think what's going to happen is, particularly like you say, mothers like yourself, what will happen is, I don't want my child in that lesson. And you'll find parents pulling their kids out of schools. Then those institutions will have their hand forced to really think about how well you do.
What about the Muslim community? I mean, I presume that they would just simply say, thanks very much, get up and take them out. And I tell you what, all communities will feel like this. Why is it the Scots don't rise up against this? Why do they say, oh, it's a good idea my local council are contributing this, good idea my government are contributing, good idea the NHS are contributing? They don't say anything. These things just seem to happen. Scotland is becoming a very, very odd place.
There has to be a shake-up to force that change. That's what I'm saying. Like, look throughout history about every change and evolution in society that has come. There has been the flashpoint. What we're living through in real time is the flashpoint on this issue, and over time it will evolve to find a settling ground. But things like this have to happen to shake up the system, to have this conversation, because otherwise, if they weren't yelling in a way that forced us to talk about it, we would not talk about it.
Well, I've got to say, credit where it is due, because there does seem to be a very tiny glimmer of common sense prevailing, and perhaps it comes off the back of this CAS report, because over in Scotland, they have announced actually they're going to be pausing the, what do you call it? The
puberty blockers.
Yeah, but what do you call it? What other prescribing, that's the word. When they're trying to prescribe these children with puberty blockers now, so they're going to be pausing that. In Scotland, you've already seen that they're pausing it in England. I celebrate this enormously, because I think pumping a child's mind full of this notion that if you're unhappy, the kind of elixir to fixing all of your problems is to try and externally modify you to look like a boy, or vice versa. I think it's such a delusion. I think it's dangerous. I think it's untrue. And I think it has lasting medical impacts on those children. I don't think it should ever have been a thing in the first place. So I celebrate the fact it's been paused. Do you?
No, look, I do. Of course, the puberty blockers actually do start at 18 now. So actually they stopped. I'm not sure, I think it was the 15 and 16-year-olds they stopped today. The clinic in Scotland refused, as did other clinics, to hand over the data which showed what was the effect and what those children were like before they went in, and whether they should have ever have been granted any drug. So any time we've got this stop, and that lady who came up with the report,
Hilary Cass, Dr. Hilary Cass,
basically said that actually that there wasn't enough data to hand out any kind of drugs and make any kind of assessment of these children, so fantastic for her, and I hope one day she gets some fantastic award for doing all this. But on the puberty blocker, this was quite wrong, but. You know, there will be opportunities for people to contest this, but this was probably one of the best medical reports that there has been.
Julita?
Well, what I would say is that before everyone becomes very reactionary to the shock of this actually being done, and why it was done in the first place and now being halted, is always ask what led to it. Because when you speak to trans people, what they'll say is that what you're dealing with, particularly in a particular demographic of the trans community, is men who have transitioned to become women. Part of the thing they have to deal with, a lot of apprehension, a lot of fear, is that when you go out being identified to have been a man because you don't have the look, you're not passable as a woman. And what they'll say is that if only I transitioned sooner, all of those masculine attributes wouldn't have changed me to a point where I can't reverse it, no matter how much surgery, no matter how much transitioning. So they're thinking, if I'd started sooner. So again, that's where the problem lies. You're resolving an adult problem through children, and you shouldn't be, but understand the motivation. And those are the people you should be talking to, that at the end of the day, it's medically proven. The prefrontal cortex doesn't develop completely until you're 25. They cannot understand the gravity of a decision like this when you are a child. So unfortunately, there are some things that, although you want it, you cannot have, because the decision that decision to be made should only be made by an adult. But you do appreciate that what they're trying to do is prevent a later trauma in life by giving those trans children the opportunity to not have to go through them.
I don't want anyone to experience trauma, and I don't doubt that there's a lot of children that genuinely think that they're the opposite sex. So I'm not doubting that trauma, but I don't think that the way that you avoid that trauma is by indulging the delusion. I think the kind thing to do is to work with that child, to tell them the truth, that if you're a biological male, you can't become a biological female. You just can't. It's a fact of life. You might not like it, it might cause you heartache, but it's true. So then you work with that child, not to diminish their feelings, because I believe that those feelings, I'm sure that they have them, I'm sure that they're real, and I'm sure that they're hurting them and really upsetting the family and all the rest of it, because it will be very traumatic for your child to be that sad. But the kind answer to this, surely, is to work with that child to help them become happy in actually who they are, rather than selling them a delusion and helping them to live a life.
Well, what about the other trauma? What about the trauma of those who are going through complicated worlds? they change, then they want to change back. What about that trauma?
That's why I say this is good. It will help that. But again, it's the language. But saying something, even a word like saying it's a delusion, you just have to recognize that there's a sensitivity that must be used in the approach to all discourse on the topic.